I might be making the scariest live video that I have ever made, second only to the one I made in June a year ago when the Supreme Court decision came down about Roe v. Wade. But here goes. I'm Janice. I'm a parenting coach. I'm an educator. I'm a lot of things. And if you follow me on Instagram, you see evidence of all of those. But today I'm coming on this live video because I want to talk to you about the movie The Sound of Freedom. There are a ton of reviews about the Barbie movie on social media right now, and I love that, and so many great things about that movie that I've heard, and yes, I'm going to go see that movie. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a movie that's a lot harder to talk about. So I experienced with my husband The Sound of Freedom, and some friends and one of our kids, The Sound of Freedom this past weekend. And if you don't know, it is about based on a true story about the child sex trafficking industry in this world. And the story is centered on two children from Honduras who are snatched away from their family, and the ensuing story about an agent from this country who seeks to save them. So here's the thing. This is really hard to talk about, right? We all know that sex trafficking in general, and certainly child sex trafficking, is a really significant industry in this world. But there were some statistics in this movie that really just boggle even my mind. Child sex trafficking exists, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, people. So here's what that means. That means that there are people from all walks of life, mostly men who are pedophiles and abusers, some women, and certainly women who contribute to the industry, by the way. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. That means that no walk of life is not included, right? That there are adults across the globe in all countries at all socioeconomic levels, across all races and ethnicities, who contribute to this industry. And there's some pretty powerful people, there have to be, with that kind of money involved, pretty powerful people who have their hand in this industry. Some basic statistics: child sex trafficking makes up 27% of all human trafficking victims, right? So 27%. At the end of the day, that's millions of children. Let that sink in for a second. Millions of children every single year who become a part of this sex trafficking industry. We know that of those, the majority are girls, but not always. That 1 out of 2, I believe, children are girls. And again, it doesn't really matter, right? Kids are kids. In the United States, human trafficking tends to occur around international travel hubs, like with large immigrant populations, notably 3 states of note: California, Texas, and Georgia. And again, those trafficked include young children, teenagers, men, women. Victims can be domestics, borns, it doesn't matter. So those are just quick stats I looked up because I wanted to add some additional statistics to the conversation. But here's some simple truths. Pedophilia affects around 5%, mostly male, of the population. About 5%, which seems really teeny tiny. Except that when you start to look at numbers behind that, right? And it is a tiny percent in the scope of the big picture. But what that means is that that multi-billion-dollar industry is fueled, if you will, by about 5% of the population. And the good news is that thankfully not everybody who has fantasies about children in this way act on them, right? There are certainly a percentage of people out there, again, mostly men, who have sexual fantasies about kids but never act on them. And, thank God for that. And you've probably noticed I'm looking up and down, up and down. That's because I had to write all of this out and get it out of my system. I've been really kind of on pins and needles for the last couple of days since I watched the movie because I knew I needed to do something. And so it took me a minute to get here, which is why you see me going back and forth. So again, we're talking about adults, mostly men from around the world, who contribute to this industries. And what it means is also this, you guys. Here's one of the really hard truths. That it's almost a guarantee that in every one of our circles, there is someone with some version of pedophilia, right? Whether they're having thoughts, whether they consume child porn, whatever it is, it's very likely that in every single one of our circles, there is someone. And statistically speaking, in this country, we know that most kids who are assaulted, molested, raped, whatever word you want to use, by an adult, it's almost always somebody we know. We know that already. That's a strong statistic in this country. But it means that almost every single one of us likely knows somebody who is contributing, like I said, in some way. So here was the real epiphany for me walking out of that movie. The real epiphany for me was this. My own story is horrific. And if you know it, you know that already. If you don't, go look up on your favorite podcast platform, Dumpster Diving with Janice and Jane. That's a podcast I started back in January with my sister, my new sister. You can hear that whole story. And the January 22nd, I think, episode 4, is my story. And that's where I kind of lay out all of that. So if you don't know my story, go see it. But to summarize it here, it was horrific. And yet I walked out of this movie thinking to myself, this is worse. This is so much worse. Now, I'm somebody who constantly says we shouldn't compare trauma, right? Every person's trauma is their trauma, but I'll compare my own. And I will say to you that I walked out of The Sound of Freedom thinking to myself, those kids, it's so much worse. And I apologize, in my live video, you can probably hear the truck noise in the background, but we're going to keep going. So here's why. Even though I lived with my abuser, right? Even though I lived with the constant threat of being raped, even though I never knew when I was going to be safe or when I wasn't going to be safe, there were moments, periods, brief periods of calm. There were periods of safety, times when my abuser had to travel for work, for example, right? Those were good times for me because he was out of the home for a certain number of days. I knew exactly when, and I knew exactly how many days I had where I could kind of let my guard down a bit because I was safe. Likewise, I had stability. I went to school every single day, where, thank God, there were adults who cared about me, who made me feel safe while I was there. I had a home. It was dangerous all the time, yes, but I did have a home. I knew exactly where I was going to sleep every single night. There wasn't always the food that we needed. There wasn't always the basic needs being met, but there was a roof, right, every single night. And there's some... psychologically speaking, there's some benefit to that, right? To having that stability, even though what was happening behind those four walls was horrific. And at the end of the day, I had hope for an ending. I actually early on recognized that if I did well in school and went to college, that college could be my way out. And that's exactly how my story played out. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. And so because of that, there was hope that there would be an ending, that there would come a period in my life where I could physically remove myself and keep myself safe from that life. But these kids, you guys, once they're snatched, there's no end except death. And I can't imagine that many of them don't have a moment every single day where they low-key just wish they were dead. There's no stability. They're thrust into a life of chaos, a life of being passed around from one broken adult to another, a life of being raped over and over again. And in this movie, they talk about 5 to 10 times a day. Okay, I just want you to sit with that, you guys. I want you to sit with the children in your life, in your head right now. And I want you to think about that. And I know that's a really hard thing to ask you to do, but the truth of the matter is that is the beginning of us doing something, right, to impact an industry that has only continued to skyrocket in the last 10 years. Skyrocket, right? So it's like the more developed we become as a country, as a world, the more depraved we become. So I want you to think about that idea. Children, right? Tiny little 4-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old children being repeatedly passed from person to person in the same day, right? They're living a life every single day where they're starved, they're beaten, and God freaking knows what else. Because obviously, if you're passing children around, it's because there are depraved people who want to do things that we don't want to imagine to other people. And they're handed children with them to do that. So a life where they are bought and sold by men, again, mostly men, from all walks of life. And there is no end in sight except death. So I walked out of that movie and I thought, what could I possibly do? Right? The story again is of two remarkable children who were taken from their father in Honduras, and thrust into this world. And again, the man who endeavors to save them. But, that was a man who, at least that's what he did. He worked for an agency. That's what they did. What could I possibly do? So I've been sitting on it, like I said, for 2 days. And at the end of the movie, the star, the gentleman who's the star in the movie, offers a call to action. And the first call to action is really simple. It's see the frickin' movie. Talk about the movie. Make it possible for others to see the movie. They even offer you like a QR code, right, where you can donate money so that people who would like to see the movie can see the movie. We don't want money to stop people from seeing the movie, because in this case, you guys, there is something about the experience of sitting in a theater with other people, seeing this story together, that is unique in a way that you can't replicate at home. So seeing the movie as a way to ultimately lift the veil of secrecy off of this world, because we don't talk about this. This happens every day. Children are taken every day, and it is not reported on the news. We do not talk about it, and I get it, because it's horrific to think about, right? But this movie is going to serve to lift the veil of secrecy off the world, the industry, and force it onto the forefront of our daily experience. And I also realized that what I can do, what you can do, we can see the movie, have that experience with a large group of people. We can talk about it, not just even here on social media like I'm doing right now, but on a regular basis, talk about it in our day-to-day lives, right? So I'm doing this as a kickoff. I'm making a commitment here to talk about this on a more regular basis on my own platforms as a way of just constantly bringing us back to it. But talking about it at home with our families, over happy hour with our friends and neighbors, at holiday gatherings. I know, yes, you heard me talk about the massive impact that pedophiles are having on our children, on our communities, and on our society. And I know that's really uncomfortable, but the truth is the impact is real. And here's the thing, I want to be very careful about this, right? This is not a me asking for a witch hunt. This is not a go seek out and figure out who they are. This is simply talk about it in all of your own social circles, because they're there. And the more we talk about it, perhaps we create a level of discomfort that will actually encourage somebody to go get some help, actually encourage somebody to continue to not act on those instincts that they have, if that's the group that they're in, if you will. Because the fact of the matter is the impact is real. And if we think that keeping our own kids safe is our only priority, you guys, we are so wrong, right? The more this industry grows, the more we are all at risk of the fallout. Generations of kids who are forever changed by their trauma. Millions of kids literally lost to us around the world and never to be returned to their families. Countless influential people left to grow this behavior across our planet. Just grow it and foster it because they're making money off of it. We will all be impacted. So what I can do and what you can do is shed our light. Speak our truths. Make the people around you who are implicated, even as they try to hide among us, uncomfortable, like I said. And again, maybe just uncomfortable enough to either stop behavior they're already engaged in, or seek to change their behavior, or seek help to support making sure they never act on their thoughts. At the end of the day, I think the biggest impact of this movie, this story, on me is this. Our children are not for sale. And the main character says that in the movie at some point. He says, actually, God's children are not for sale. Couldn't agree with that more, but I'm only tweaking it to our children are not for sale, just because I know there are some people out there that if you put God in front of it, I don't have to pay attention. And so our children are not for sale. And here's the hardest truth of all. One of my biggest mantras applies here just as much as anywhere else, and that is this, that your silence is your consent. I know that's harsh, but it is the truth. It is the way our brains work. When no one speaks out, when no one starts the hard conversation, when no one sheds a light, the abusers around us will take that silence as consent. or at the very least as a green light that their behavior will continue to go unchecked. I know that from personal experience because mine sure as hell did. So join me, won't you? Use your voice. Our children are not for sale. Thanks for listening.